In a way, Van is kind of like a cliché submarine movie. It begins in a claustrophobic environment, there's a command dysfunction, the limitations of the vessel are tested, someone has to go up on deck, there's a special mission interrupting the crew, they release debris to stop an attack, and of course an emergency repair which will require a human sacrifice. In this case, it's the viewer. They sacrifice the viewer and submit an incomplete competition with no humiliation. I can even draw similarities between the ending of Van and the ending of what is arguably the best submarine movie of all time, Das Boot. At the end of their patrol, the crew returns to port where they feel safe beyond the enemy's reach, only to have an enemy bomber come and attack them. During the attack, their boat is sunk, leaving us with one of the film's many messages. There are no winners in war. Kenny feels as though his win has been safely secured after he takes control of the driver's seat, but the vessel is rendered useless and there are no victors. For these reasons, Van is a polarizing episode. Fans either love it for its one-location environment, its simple plot, and its classic scenes of Kenny pestering Spenny. Or they hate it for its stagnant, non-consequential beats that end with, "Whoops, it's a draw. No humiliation." Something very special happens in Van. We see for the first time the whiteboard being used to make the rules. In previous episodes, it was only for Spenny. He used it to establish his strategy and make more money, and first to use their arms loses. He uses it for the definitions in stand and sane. He also uses it to organize his personal brand in fashion and male dancer. The rules for this competition are very simple. S, no kissing. Stay in Van, no touching. Spenny decides his best chance at winning is to assemble his group of devious thinkers to plan attacks and defenses against Kenny's upcoming siege. Who are the lucky 6 people that we barely see in this episode and never see again, you might ask? Rocky Dennis, Trevor from the trailer park, Jeffrey Dahmer, a greasy-haired fella, Vin Diesel with Down syndrome, and a guy who looks like he's probably French. After Kenny installs his fridge, coffee maker, hot plate, and lighting, he settles in to play 3D Pinball Space Cadet.
Has been completely mutated from pushing buttons and...
Soon after, Spenny's plan for the vicious dog to scare Kenny out of the van fails. Spenny's garage sale plan not only fails, but it also ends with Rocky, Trevor, and Jeffrey turning on him. I think if any scene in this episode has the potential to be scripted, it's this one.
And put everything back.
We don't have time to put everything back if the police are coming.
Like, really? You don't have time to throw everything through the front door and run? The police are not on their way with lights and sirens. And there's like 12 things there. The mannequin lamp, Silencio mask, Darth Vader mask, the yam shirt from Who Do Girls Like More, a pink shirt, the flag that hangs above Kenny's bed, his leather jacket, and some random stuff here. There's 3 of you. You don't have time to run back and forth real quick and ditch the evidence in the living room?
I will give you $200 right now if you yank him out of the van.
Why didn't Spenny bid higher for them to pull Kenny out? The only thing that kind of saves it for me is that Spenny was willing to put his friends in danger to escape the attack. There's a guy hanging on the back while Spenny was reversing. Like, if he slipped off, he would have gone under the van for sure. Kenny's plan to drive like a maniac until Spenny jumps out is eventually foiled because the van won't start. Why won't the van start? Let's go through some of the theories that are wrong, and then I'll explain why the van wouldn't start.
Battery's dying. Oh my god, the battery's dead. The battery's dead!
The battery is not dead. Some people claim that all of Kenny's electronics killed the battery. The electronics do run off the battery, but as long as the van is running, the alternator is charging the battery. Spenny only turns the van off long enough to switch places before Kenny tries to restart the van. So the fridge and coffee maker wouldn't have caused the battery to die in that, 60 seconds? You can even hear the van attempting to start 3 times.
Where'd you get that key?
I brought this spare starting. The battery's dead. The battery's actually dead.
It made 3 strong attempts to start before it refused to turn over anymore.
The battery's dead! I love it! It's actually dead.
Is it fake? Some people allege that the episode is fake and the ending of the script is written as the van fails to start, end of episode. They allege that Kenny attempted to start the van, then once it started, he shut it off and claimed that it wouldn't start. This did not happen. Not only did it not happen, it's f***ing stupid. If they wanted to fake a draw, the guys could have stayed where they were and ran out the clock. More on that later. Here's the truth. When I was 17, we had this exact van. This model of caravan implemented a new anti-theft device where the key held a transponder chip which was needed to communicate with an immobilizer in order for the van to start. This is the transponder key. You see it several times throughout the episode, most prominently at the beginning of the episode when Kenny waves it around, and again once Spenny crawls into the back. And this is the key that Kenny had cut at the auto parts store. It had no transponder, therefore the van wouldn't start. Okay, but why do we hear it turn over 3 times but then stop turning over? Is the battery dead now? No. Like I said, my family had one of these vans, and I distinctly remember my father telling me, if the van fails to start twice, don't try and start it a 3rd time, because if it fails a 3rd time, it will lock out and need to be towed to the dealership. That's why the van won't attempt to start, even when the taxi driver hooks up his booster cables.
You have no idea what you're doing.
Give it a
It's not
minute.
working.
Give it a minute. I don't know what's
The
going on.
car's broken.
It was locked out. Why didn't Kenny try the new key to make sure it would work? He did, but he only tried it in the tailgate. This technology had been in luxury vehicles for a while, but this was new to the common man. Kenny didn't know anything about a transponder chip in the van key. In his mind, it unlocked the tailgate, therefore it should work in the ignition. However, there's one thing that really bothers me. When we see him attempt to start the van, we see the RPM needle jump up while the engine is still turning over. Starter motors crank at roughly 3,600 RPM, which turns the engine at roughly 200 to 300 RPM after you convert for gear ratios. It won't crank the motor anywhere near 1,000 RPM. This indicates to me that the van, in fact, did start. Perhaps the ending is fake. What's going on here? I found multiple videos on YouTube where they attempt to start one of these vans, and the RPM needle only jumps up once the van starts. So if the van doesn't start, the needle shouldn't be moving. What's going on here? This is actually what happens when you attempt to start the van with a non-programmed key. It will start briefly, but because it does not detect the signal from the key, it will shut off. That's why the RPM gauge jumped up. That's why Kenny has a delayed reaction.
I brought a spare key. Oh shit, battery's dying.
The van started, he thought it was okay, then it shut off. Okay, but why do we hear the engine continuing to turn over when it actually starts momentarily?
Where'd you get that key?
I brought a spare key. Oh!
Because they added that sound effect in post-production. If the audience hears the van start, then shut off, they won't understand what's happening. They're not going to believe that the van wouldn't start if they just heard it start. This is all new technology, remember? So they just added a sound effect in post-production that A, would cover up the sound of the van starting, and B, would clearly articulate to the audience that the van wouldn't start. Furthermore, that's not even what their starter sounds like. This is what their starter sounds like. Here's what really happened. The van briefly started, then shut off. Kenny tried to start the van 2 more times, causing the immobilizer to lock out the ignition. With the ignition locked out, the starter wouldn't turn over anymore, and they concluded that the battery had died. Once they began editing the footage into an episode, they took the liberty of adding a starter sound effect to communicate to the audience that the van wouldn't start. Okay, but maybe it started because it was able to detect Spenny's transponder key in the back of the van, and Kenny was actually able to start the van, so he had to follow through with the script and shut the van off so he could claim that the van wouldn't start. That's not how the key works. It has to be like 6 inches minimum from the ignition. But if that's really what you want to believe, you do you. There are YouTube videos of mechanics removing decorative jewelry from cars because they were blocking the signal from the key. That's how sensitive these systems are. Furthermore, this reaction makes it more real than anything else that happened. Kenny turned around to gloat once the van started, then had the smirk wiped right off his face when the van mysteriously shut off. 100% real. Well, who won this competition? It was concluded to be a draw, but was it really a draw? Did either guy break one of the disqualifying rules along the way? Did both guys stay in van? Did both guys no touching? Did Spenny kiss Kenny? Is this touching? This is certainly touching.
You're going to lose your front teeth.
Ow, that's no physical violence.
Did Spenny lose here? At 11 minutes 18 seconds, Spenny is seen out of the van sleeping on the roof. He is not in van. Does that mean he lost here? What about before that at 9 minutes 46 seconds? Did Kenny leave the van here? How much of his body needs to stay in the van for him to be considered in van? If Kenny stands outside the van, but points his arm toward the van with his hand crossing the boundary for the sliding door, is his hand in the van? Does that mean he is still in the van? It seems like you can be both outside the van and inside the van at one time. But the very first instance of someone leaving the van is when Spenny escapes the red smoke. So it seems like Spenny lost this competition because he was the first guy to not stay in van. But here's the thing. There is also a similar, yet different set of rules for this competition. The ones that were communicated orally. Cannot leave the van to go to the bathroom.
We cannot leave the van to go to the bathroom.
If feet touch the ground, you lose.
If your feet touch the ground, you lose.
You may not physically touch anything that is the other guy's.
You may not physically touch anything that is mine.
And no infiltrating the other person's space.
And no infiltrating the other person's space.
Going by those rules, Spenny doesn't touch the ground, so he would still be in this competition. But later on, Kenny infiltrates the other person's space and touches something that belongs to the other guy when he steals the pork. If we're working by the oral rules, then Kenny lost the competition. So we need to make a decision as to whether the written rules are the rules or the oral rules are the rules. It seems to me like the oral rules are somewhat applicable, but they only apply when they suit Kenny. After Kenny steals Spenny's pork, he says,
You're not allowed in the back. Disqualification.
It seems like no infiltrating the other person's space is a rule that only applies to Spenny. Kenny broke that rule by stealing the pork. He doesn't circumvent the rule just because he reaches from the open door through the window. Like, he's still infiltrating Spenny's space. But there are no repercussions for the infraction. Kenny seems to think it was okay to do that, and Spenny doesn't call him out on it. Well, by that logic, it seems the written rules are also somewhat applicable because Spenny hits Kenny and no touching was a written rule. Here's the problem. It seems like both sets of rules apply, but neither set of rules is being enforced, which is often a thing on the show. They can't cut the competition short, so they just keep going. Each time a rule is broken, the action is given a warning instead of a disqualification. So the rules are, stay in van, if your feet touch the ground you lose, no touching, no infiltrating the other person's space, you may not touch anything that is the other guy's, and cannot leave the van to go to the bathroom. If I combine all of these rules and say they all count, Spenny loses. The first person to break a rule was Spenny. Kenny wins. But speaking of the bathroom, how did they go to the bathroom? We saw Kenny use the bucket, but it's strange. Where did he keep the bucket? It's not over here by his head. It's not over here on the passenger side of the fridge. And it's not over here on the driver's side of the fridge. Did he keep it in the chase vehicle? The second van that the crew used to ride around? Did they bring it to him when he needed to use it? Did they dump it out on the street or in a gas station bathroom? Did they also have a bucket for Spenny? Please explain the logistics of the bathroom situation in van. I think I can safely assume the crew played a large support role in this competition, because if no one can exit the van, how did they keep it fueled? How many kilometers are you going to get out of a tank of gas in an '05 Dodge Caravan? 400? Maybe 500? They drove around and idled for 3 days. The crew must have pumped gas for them at least once. So I'm going to assume that A, they carried the bucket for Kenny, since I can only see it when Kenny uses it, and B, they carried a bucket for Spenny too. I think I've gone over the reality of this episode quite extensively. When I think about whether the show is real or fake, one thing that always jumps out to me as proof of the show's reality is failure. Scripted shows don't have failure in the script. Spenny's cheating plan would have worked. Lenny would have gotten his lines right. Stephen wouldn't have walked off. There are multiple failures in this episode alone. The dog not attacking, the garage sale backfiring, and finally the van failing to start. You know what else failed and nobody noticed? Kenny was going to blast the decent human pork-fetching guy, but his extinguisher was actually empty. You can see him prepping it, aiming it, and he squeezes the trigger only for a tiny dusting of particles to float out. People say the ending was fake. Why would they fake an incredibly anticlimactic ending? If it was fake, they would have gone and got the correct key made and reshot the ending. If it was fake, Kenny could have turned around. Hey, Spenny, give me the key real quick so we can drive fast and shoot the ending. Yeah, okay, buddy, here you go. Failing is a part of the reality of Kenny versus Spenny. I'm giving Van a 2.5 out of 5. No points for narrative. All the schemes were either foiled or they just failed. Interactions and reactions each get a point. They bicker and manipulate just as you would expect. Entertainment value gets half a point. And no points for secondary characters. It's just these guys, and their contribution isn't really worth it. So what do you think? Did the van start and shut down? Or is the whole thing fabricated? Is that the reincarnation of Jeffrey Dahmer? Does this deserve a better rating than 2.5? Let me know in the comments. As always, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to help the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.